The different sounds they made, the way they looked, the physics that allowed them to rocket through the sky, and most of all, the men who controlled them with obvious mastery. I built my first model airplane when I was 6 years old. It was a replica of Charles Lindbergh's Spirit of St. Louis. I read a lot about Lucky Lindy and understood that his flight across the Atlantic wasn't really about luck. He planned. He prepared. He endured. That's what made him heroic to me. By 1962, when I was 11 years old, I was already reading every book and magazine I could find that talked about flying. That was also the year I took my first plane ride. My mom, a first-grade teacher, invited me to accompany her to a statewide PTA convention in Austin, and it was her first plane ride, too. The airport, Dallas Love Field, was 75 miles south of our house, and when we got there, it seemed like a magical place filled with larger-than-life people. Pilots, stewardesses, well-dressed passengers with somewhere to go. In the terminal, I stopped at the newly installed statue of a Texas Ranger. The plaque read, "One Riot, One Ranger," and told the apocryphal story of a small-town disturbance in the 1890s. A local sheriff had called for a company of rangers to stop the violence, and when only one ranger showed up, the townspeople were taken aback. They'd asked for help, and now wondered if they were being denied. "How many riots do you have?" the ranger allegedly asked. "If y'all got just one, all you need is one ranger. I'll take care of it." I also saw another hero that day at the airport. I had been enthralled by the early Project Mercury space missions, so I was excited to spot a short, thin man walking through the terminal. He was wearing a suit, a tie, a hat, and his face was completely familiar to me. I recognized him from television as Lieutenant Colonel John Shorty Powers, the voice of Mission Control. I couldn't bring myself to approach him, though. A guy who had all these astronauts to talk to didn't need an 11-year-old kid tugging at his jacket. It was a cloudy day, a little rainy, and we walked out on the tarmac to climb a staircase onto our US Airways Flight, a Convair 440. My mom wore white gloves and a hat. I was in a sport coat and slacks. That's how people traveled then, in their Sunday best. Our seats were on the right side of the aircraft. My mom would have loved to look out the window, but she knew me. "You take the window seat," she said, and even before the plane had moved an inch, my face was pressed against the glass, taking everything in. As the plane sped down the runway and began to rise, I was wide-eyed. My first thought was that everything on the ground looked like a model railroad layout. My second thought was that I wanted this life in the air. It took a few more years for me to return to the skies. When I was 16, I asked my dad if I could take flying lessons. He'd been a dental surgeon in the Navy during World War II. He had great respect for aviators, and he clearly saw my passion. Through a friend, he got the name of a crop-dusting pilot named L.T. Cook, Jr., who had a landing strip on his property nearby. Before World War II, Mr. Cook had been an instructor in the federal government's civilian pilot training program. At the time, isolationists didn't want the United States getting involved in the war in Europe. But President Roosevelt knew the United States was likely to enter the conflict and would need thousands of qualified pilots. Starting in 1939, veteran flyers such as Mr. Cook were charged with training civilians so they'd be ready when and if war was declared. The program was controversial at the time, but as things turned out, all of those prepared pilots helped the Allies win the war. Mr. Cook and pilot trainers like him were the unsung stateside heroes. When I met him, he was in his late 50s, and a no-nonsense, all-business kind of man. Most of his time was spent crop dusting, but if he saw someone who seemed to have the smarts and temperament to fly, he'd take him on as a student. I guess he liked the look of me well enough. I was this tall, quiet, earnest kid, and I was respectful because my parents had taught me to be deferential to my elders. I was also the classic introvert, and he wasn't a guy who needed much conversation. He saw I was serious about flying and that I had an obvious enthusiasm.